Good afternoon. This time I'd like to call to order the Rail Committee meeting of the City of Palo Alto for Tuesday, December 5th, 2023. Sorry for a little delay in the start. We had some technical difficulties, but we're rolling now. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Chair Burt.
Here.
Councilmember Binker. Here. Councilmember Lowy.
Here.
For the record, all present.
Thank you. So our first item is public comments for members of the public to speak on any item that is within the purview of the committee, but is not on the otherwise on the agenda today. Do we have any members of the public who wish to speak?
Yes, we do. Our first speaker is Martin Summer.
Hello, everyone. Hello, and thank you for listening. So 2 weeks ago, you guys had a meeting. I listened to it pretty thoroughly, and I wrote an email to the Rail Committee and the Council. And I just, two things. I want to put some voice behind some of the things I wrote there. And then secondly, I want to add a couple more comments on option A, which was University Avenue Station. So there we go. Wait a minute. You just blocked my notes. Hang on a second. Okay, sorry, you wiped out what I was reading. Okay, so anyway, number one, 4 points. Number one, as you mentioned, the cost of implementing a 4-track section is the responsibility of high-speed rail and not the city of Palo Alto. Actually, I'm sorry, I missed the line. I spent some time looking over what's in the meeting. It appears to me that option C, San Antonio Station, would be the most viable option, in my opinion, for the 4-track section. Number one, the cost of implementing the 4-track section is the responsibility of high-speed rail and not the city of Palo Alto. Number two, based on the current work being done by high-speed rail in Kings County, the one thing that they seem to be very good at is rebuilding multimodal overpasses like the one at San Antonio. Number three, as both Nadia Nyack and Councilmember Ed Lang mentioned, there may be future land use and housing benefits that come from a redesigned project area. And number four, to my estimation, the reconstruction interruption of San Antonio Exchange would be far less of an interruption than if we rebuild Oregon Expressway or the University Avenue exchanges. That was all in the email. In addition to that, I wanted to add 2 more comments on when you discussed option A, which is the University Avenue Station. An initial question came up when you first looked at the plans, and Councilmember Ed Lang said, is there housing involved? And there was a very quick no. Well, the real answer is yes. There are 44 homes directly across the street from the University Avenue Station, and that's called the Auditory Condo Complex. Each one of these units is valued around 1.5 million, and there are 44 families that inhabit these units. And to relocate the tracks directly in front of our windows would be devastating. Number two, Nadia Nyack very enthusiastically stated, high-speed rail would be so happy if we could straighten the tracks for them. Well, I just want to be clear, we do not want to straighten the tracks at University Avenue, and we do not want 110-mile-an-hour trains going right past our windows. So when the decision comes, please keep us in mind. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Eric Nordman.
This is Eric, but I had some slides and it doesn't seem like I can present them. Is that correct for Zoom?
I'm sorry, Eric. If you would have sent them to us ahead of time, I would have been able to pull them up.
Yeah, I was
sorry about that.
But planning to attend, but okay, so I'll stop for now.
Okay, our next speaker is Adrian Brandt.
Good afternoon, committee members. I just wanted to call your attention to, if you didn't see it, the front page article in the Daily Post last week stating that the Castro Street, Mountain View Castro Street grade separation, in which they're closing Castro at the foot of Castro and building two very nice, very wide, aesthetically beautiful bicycle pedestrian tunnels across from Castro to the other side of Central Expressway. That project, in the space of 1 year's time, unfortunately, has now doubled in cost in round numbers from about 135 million to 270 million. And so what went from being what the city thought was a fully funded project is now they're in scramble mode trying to figure out if they want to quote unquote, value engineer it by basically making the tunnels more narrow and less aesthetically pleasing, or leaving one off, or removing the automobile-oriented pedestrian ramp from Evelyn up to Castro. So the reason I bring it up is just to make you aware, and they did state in the article and in the staff report, that these projects are escalating $5 to $10 million a year just with background inflation. So just to be aware that there is a cost to not moving quicker. And, the rest of the cost increase was due to all kinds of, nationwide increases in building materials, pandemic related construction costs, et cetera. The other thing I just wanted to note quickly, it may be of interest to the committee. I did see in the supplemental reading materials for tomorrow's Caltrain board meeting that their proposed contract with AECom for the Rengstorff grade separation does mention in the text of the agreement that they will be building the bridge and the electrification infrastructure such that it will accommodate 4 tracks. And that is an underpass, so the tracks will remain at grade with the bridge across Rengstorff. Again, tying back to my prior comment, the city may have to, or may decide to just defer Rengstorff in order to continue building Castro on the previously envisioned schedule, but that remains to be seen. Anyway, thank you.
Our next speaker is Carrie Wagner.
Hi, I think actually I want to speak to the study session, so I believe that I should talk later on. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, I'm sorry then. I will check back in.
No problem. Our next speaker then is Steve Rosenblum.
Good afternoon, Rail Committee members. My name is Steve Rosenblum. I live in Old Palo Alto. I just wanted to mention an idea that occurred to me that might help the discussion of the rail crossing issue, which I don't think has come up in any discussions I've heard, which is the possibility of permanently reducing the width of Alma from 4 lanes to 2 lanes. That is 1 lane in each direction. That would make it no longer a kind of a high-speed roadway through town, but more of a local street. And if we were to build something like a viaduct structure, it would make the area under the viaduct much more accessible. It would calm the traffic. It would make Alma a street along which people could bicycle instead of having to consider bicycling along El Camino as Caltrans has proposed. We all know that El Camino is not a very pleasant street to be a pedestrian or a bicyclist on, even in its current conditions. And I think removing the parking and putting the bicyclists next to the cars doesn't sound like a very pleasing opportunity. So I'd like to inject that idea into the Rail Committee and see if that would make sense. I know there's a lot of issues that need to be considered, especially north-south traffic flow, but hopefully those could be mitigated. At the present time, Alma isn't really a through street anymore. It terminates at El Camino at the Palo Alto Avenue crossing, and it certainly turns into a kind of a slalom course in downtown where it has many S curves in it. So by the time you get to Hamilton Avenue, it's pretty much a pretty slow moving street, even though it's 4 lanes. So I'd like to just toss that idea out and hope that it merits some consideration on your part. Thank you.
We have no further requests.
Thank you. So at this time, we'll go to our next item, which is updates from our staff on interagency activities, those being Caltrain, VTA, and other city staff activities. Philip?
Thank you very much. I'm Philip Cammy, Chief Transportation Official. Being that we just met 2 weeks ago, this committee, I don't have a lot to update, but I'll just give you a few. City staff met yesterday with Caltrain staff actually to do initial review of the Caltrain technical comments. Also want to note that there's a VTA ad hoc committee meeting on December 15th at 10 a.m. at VTA headquarters. Thank you, and that concludes my report.
Well, I'll add one other Caltrain update of importance, which is that in recent weeks, BART and MTC board members have spoken publicly about an issue that was being explored by MTC staff in recent months, which is the prospect of a merger of Caltrain and BART, which is not an initiative that is supported in any way by Caltrain. So I would characterize it as a prospective hostile takeover of Caltrain by BART. This is something that is now of a real importance to Caltrain to have MTC focus on the important issues of the transit agencies in the region being having integrated service and integrated fare systems as opposed to a single agency or combining agencies. BART is well known through the press is going through great struggles. All the transit agencies have been impacted, but they, in particular, in a challenging period. But the notion that them taking over a very efficient and effective transit agency like Caltrain as some means to resolve their issues is not necessarily, or we on the Caltrain board don't believe it's in the interest of Caltrain, and similarly VTA has similar concerns, and that the voice of certainly Santa Clara and San Mateo counties would be very subordinate to the elected board of the balanced elected board of BART if that were to occur. So I wanted to get that out there to make sure people were aware of it. And MTC has a meeting on Friday where this appears that it will be discussed, and there are a number of the regional elected officials that already come out expressing real concerns over consideration of this proposal. So I think that's most relevant information related to our purview, which then would allow us to go forward with our study session, the bulk of our meeting today. So that's the update on the Palo Alto Bike and Pedestrian Transportation Plan, the acronym BPTP. We're going through a once a decade or so update to that plan. And Philip, did you want to kick this off?
Well, yes, certainly. Thank you. Just want to really introduce Ozzy Arce, who I think most of you are all familiar with. Ozzy also has a consultant here who he'll be introducing. I'm going to turn it over to him.
Did you want to share? Or...
Oh, I can go ahead.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and just let me know if you want to switch those.
While we tee that up, just wanted to introduce myself again. My name is Ozzy Arce, a senior transportation planner with the Office of Transportation. Today, we're going to talk about the BPTP update, Bicycle and Pedestrian Transportation Plan. As Councilmember Burt noted, it's been a little bit over a decade since we last updated the plan in 2012. And so I know the community and council, as well as the Office of Transportation, are excited to kick off this effort. With me tonight, we have Amanda from Kittleson and Associates out of Oakland. I'm very excited to work with them on this effort. And just before we kick off, just wanted to note as well that while the name is very much the Bicycle and Pedestrian Transportation Plan, part of, I think, the why what we're doing this is because we recognize in transportation that we are beyond just bicycles and pedestrians, and recognizing that even back in 2012, the city had the foresight to make it a footnote in the existing 2012 BPTP that this plan is not just about bicycles and pedestrians, recognizing that there are other mobility types that have come on board. And especially more recently, we've seen e-scooters, shared micromobility, and through the pandemic, this extreme growth in e-bikes. So we want to recognize that there are more fleets coming on board, and even though we're calling it a BPTP, there's much more beyond that. So to kick us off, just wanted to also just let you know that today is just a soft intro. This is an 18 to 24 month process of which many stakeholders, including the rail committee and the city council, will get to shape. And Amanda will get into the process in a bit. But tonight we're just letting you all know about the project, introducing the effort, providing an overview of the schedule, and discussing those various touch points that we'll have with the rail committee. And ultimately, the outcome of this will be a new updated BPTP planning document that will speak to updated programs, policies, and facilities. So I think we can advance maybe a couple slides. And so just again, Amanda will highlight the introduction, how we're approaching this, dive into a bit of the technical analysis we have done and then look to do as part of the next steps. And then I'll jump back in and talk about the previous direction we received from council as well as this committee, and trying to make that link between rail committee direction and the BPTP update. So thank you. Take it away, Amanda. Advance a couple slides.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Amanda Leahy with Kittleson and Associates. I am an associate planner there and really happy to be working with you all on this important project. With the rail committee over the next 18 months to 2 years, we are looking to engage you in 3 working group meetings. We come to you today in December. We will be visiting again in spring or summer of 2024, and then again in fall with the project prioritization framework and preliminary recommendations. And we're asking you to provide review and comment on the materials we're presenting and sharing in your packets, and to also promote and get involved in the engagement activities that we'll be implementing and already have begun. And I'll share more about those later. Next slide. This bicycle and pedestrian transportation plan update is a critical planning, policy, and implementation document that supports efforts to improve the safety and attractiveness of walking, biking, and rolling in the city. The objectives of this plan are to seek robust community feedback, to reevaluate implementation progress from previous plans, to adjust recommendations from the prior plans, and identify new policies, facilities, and programs to recommend. This update will also investigate safety data to propose the most impactful recommendations. And as Ozzy mentioned, we'll be exploring the role of emerging transportation technologies, including e-bikes and micromobility devices, in support of the 2030 Comprehensive Plan and Sustainability Climate Action Plan goals, as well as a safe system approach. Next slide. So I mentioned a safe system approach. This may be a word you've been hearing a bit around here more often. This 2-year planning effort will be running in parallel with a separate Safe Streets for All action plan. They are very similar in that they are both multi-year mobility-focused planning efforts with a shared vision of enhancing roadway safety and a focus on vulnerable road users. They are also somewhat different in that this BPTP update really focuses on walking, biking, and rolling, those active and sustainable transportation modes, while the Safe Streets and for All Action Plan, or SS4A, is developing recommendations to proactively implement safety measures that eliminate fatalities and injuries on all streets for all modes, so including people driving. And they will also be conducting an equity analysis as part of their work. Slide. So here's a high-level overview of the timeline. This plan update process began about 4 months ago and will be carried out over the next 1.5 years. We are in the visioning phase, the terms related to walking and biking in the city, and how those have changed over the past 10 years. And over those next 18 months, we will have multiple touch points across 3 phases of engagements. Each phase will include a series of working group and committee meetings. In addition to this rail committee, we will be meeting with the Pedestrian and Bicycle Advisory Committee, the City School Transportation Safety Committee, the Planning and Transportation Commission, and City Council. And we have also assembled an interagency staff working group we will be meeting with on that same cadence. In this first visioning phase, we've created a website, a logo, an interactive map, and an online survey that we created in partnership with the SS4A team. We've also participated in the Bike Palo Alto event and have an upcoming visioning workshop at the end of January. In the next phase, we'll be conducting more in-person meetings with community members at standing community events as part of neighborhood meetings, and then as part of project-specific design charrettes, which may include walk audits or other activities. And we'll also be conducting a public survey. In the third and final phase, we'll do one final round of committee and working group meetings and have a larger public meeting to review our recommendations. Next slide. And this is a screenshot of the interactive map. I hope some of you have visited. We will be keeping it live through the end of this month. And then I've also included a few photos from that Bike Palo Alto event I mentioned. Next slide. In terms of technical analysis, we are really covering a lot of ground here. Transportation planning has come a long ways in the last decade, and we are implementing some new analysis methods to really help us understand how to prioritize recommendations and what recommendations to develop. So on the left, you can see the work we've already completed or is in progress. We have collected a bunch of GIS data and are starting to map the existing network. We are gathering feedback from a number of working groups right now, and we'll have a final network map at the end of this month that we'll be using to conduct the GIS or spatial analysis for this plan. We've also conducted a literature review of over 20 planning documents and used that to create a programs and policies inventory. And then we have taken a look at the bicycle-friendly community assessment application that was completed a few years back that established the city as a gold level community. And we looked at the new criteria that the League of American Bicyclists has prepared and kind of done an evaluation and assessment of what those gaps are and how we might get Palo Alto to be a platinum level city according to this set of criteria. And I believe there is a slide on that later on. So upcoming analysis will include the bicycle level of traffic stress analysis, where we will rate the roads in the city based on the level of traffic stress it imposes on a cyclist, or how comfortable a bicyclist might feel. Level of traffic stress ranges from 1 to 4, with LTS 1 indicating a low stress facility and LTS 4 indicating a high stress facility. So basically you'll get your more novice riders, children will be able to ride on a low traffic stress facility, or the LTS 1 or 2. Whereas even some strong and fearless riders might not choose a route that includes an LTS 4 segment or crossing, which means you just basically can't access a large piece of the city by bike if there's a major barrier like that. So this analysis considers a number of inputs. This is the data that's supporting the mapping that we're doing right now, including the roadway functional classification, vehicle volume, posted or prevailing speeds, number of vehicle lanes, presence of on-street parking, and bicycle facility type. We'll also be completing a barriers analysis where we'll take a look at linear barriers like freeways, water bodies, rail lines, to understand how far people might have to walk out of their way to access a point, and basically how connected the network is. And that will help us understand the locations and types of treatments we might recommend to create more direct connections and really increase the bicycle and walk mode share. We will be also conducting a safety analysis that looks at the last 5 years of data. We are collaborating with the SS4A team again and using that same data set, but separating out the pedestrian and bicycle involved crashes. And we'll be identifying pedestrian and bicycle high injury networks. And those are the streets in the city that have the highest number or severity of injury and injury of collisions. We will be analyzing the data to understand patterns or trends in collisions as well, and common risks. And finally, we'll be completing an activities and benefits analysis, which will help us understand existing and future potential for walking and biking. Next slide. Here you can see a snapshot of the documents that we reviewed, and then specifically the topics that we were looking at within that review, to really understand alignment or conflict between vision and goals, and program and policy recommendations across these documents. Next slide. And here is that existing facilities inventory I mentioned in its draft form. We've gotten a lot of feedback already, and we are starting to incorporate those and create a revised map. Next slide. And here is that bicycle friendly community review. In our assessment, we identified a few key opportunities, including increasing the bicycle network mileage and focusing on gaps in the low stress network, increasing bicycle parking, and then expanding bicycle education as well. I think, next slide. Over to you. Okay, and then next slide, please. All right, so once again, just to recap, for this committee, we're looking forward to the discussion today, and then we'll also be coming back to you in the spring 2024 with, and we'll be able to share findings from that technical analysis that I just outlined. I'd also love to see you at some of the upcoming events. That's not a bullet on this slide, but I just wanted to reiterate that too. And then on our side, we'll be completing the technical analysis and conducting those engagement activities. And that is it for my presentation.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple slides if you want to advance to, thank you. So just wanted to put this in front of everyone for additional context. The Rail Committee and City Council has provided direction in the past as it relates to the BPTP update, specifically the bullet points at the top. Those first four are specific from a motion that council has made, speaks to, analyzing and evaluating as a part of the BPTP process, these additional grade separation crossings or just general transportation improvements. So just wanted to note that the scope of work for the BPTP update does include a task that specifically looks at these locations that council and the rail committee have directed staff to look as part of this process. And again, just want to underscore that this update will lean on and look at the 2012 BPTP as a starting point, evaluating the projects list, programs and facilities that are a part of that, and seeing which ones can carry over, including those what are known as across barrier connections that are identified in the existing BPTP. And then just specific to the Embarcadero project you see listed on bullet number 2, bike improvements on the north side. That project is already ongoing and currently in the 90% design phase. So we are making progress on some of these elements outside of the BPTP update. Additionally, in the context of making progress, the Seal Avenue versus Kellogg Avenue discussion, staff will be ready to make a recommendation on that after the conclusion of this phase's community engagement that Amanda mentioned, that should conclude at the beginning of next year, as well as the release of that existing conditions analysis.
What does that even mean? Seal versus Kellogg.
It's two locations that we're supposed to evaluate as part of the BPTP.
Yeah, so if I can clarify, for the Churchill underpass option, we're looking at a bicycle and pedestrian underpass. And the consideration is, should that underpass occur at either Seal or Kellogg?
Pretty great.
Yes.
And just to clarify, I believe this committee has already recommended that the Kellogg location not be placed any other effort on, and that the focus be on the Seal. We have not yet had an opportunity for that to go to the council for official endorsement, and we're anxiously awaiting that, because frankly, there was a bunch of consulting effort placed on Kellogg when it really was unlikely to be the better location. And we haven't done the evaluation yet on Seal.
And just to close this out and to pass over the discussion, as it relates to this, just wanted to mention that we are including the evaluation of this as part of our scope of work. However, we want to make sure that we evaluate these as part of our network, right? We want to include these to determine, where the best connections to these potential crossings are, but again, as it relates to the network. So can't emphasize that enough as a practitioner, making sure that we understand how these crossings relate and they connect to the existing.
Well, and that was actually one of the reasons why we wanted to de-emphasize Kellogg, is because at a surface level, it appears to have less value to the network than Seal, as well as having a whole bunch of physical issues of having the west side landing be on PAUSD property and strong opposition from PAUSD for having to relocate the football field and the bleachers and a whole bunch of things to accommodate something that does not look like it has much network value.
So in conclusion, we're excited to get started. I know, again, this was soft intro, and I think as we move on in the phases of this, we'll have much more to share and present and get feedback on. Thank you.
Great. So we'll have a round of questions, then hear from members of the public, and then have some discussion. I just want to say that this committee is actually the only council committee that is teed up to be reviewing this plan. And while we're not really focused on elements of the plan that don't relate to the rail corridor, because the rail corridor is so fundamental to the division of the transportation network and the connectedness of the community, seems that most of the plan has one relationship or another to what we do with rail. And then just before going forward with other questions, there are some terms that are used in the materials that I'm not sure everybody is familiar with. So just three of them that stood out to me that maybe you could give just a quick, better explanation on. One is facilities, what we mean by facilities in this context. The second is the bike level of stress. And the third is quiet streets. And so maybe before we proceed, we could just have everybody understand what those terms are meaning in this context.
Okay. Facility, these are great. This is great. Facilities, when we use the term facilities, we would mean anything, any infrastructure that supports walking or biking. So that's striped bicycle lanes, it's sidewalks, it's signal infrastructure. That's essentially what we mean there. Bicycle level of traffic stress is that LTS 1 to 4 rating. So it's a geospatial analysis of the roadway characteristics and the traffic volumes to understand how safe and comfortable a bicycle rider feels. The analysis methodology we're using is from the Minetta Transportation Institute. We're based on that analysis, and then again, like a number of data inputs go into that, and then the output will be a map of 1 to 4. Hopefully that will correspond to your own experience riding and walking. And then quiet streets, where does that come up?
Actually, maybe it's in one of the other documents that feeds into this.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with
I
quiet
think
streets.
it, if I'm recalling correctly, it may be getting used for when we have had partial street closures for bike boulevards.
Mhm.
And that was my supposition, and I want to
Yeah.
make sure I was on the right track.
Okay, I was thinking the same thing, like a term we might use would be slow streets or, yeah. Similar, but
And then just, I forget, is there a glossary associated with the, and most of the terms are kind of intuitive. There are a few that are that are less intuitive that might be helpful for everybody for all these stages to look for which things are terms of art versus kind of what
Right.
would be common.
right, yes, it is included in our scope of work actually explicitly to create a glossary for the report document, but I can see some advantages to doing that early on.
Okay,
Yeah.
colleagues, questions? Vicky, you want to?
Sure, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ozzy and Amanda, for the presentation. This BT update is more than ripe, much needed, both for safety and transportation needs. So thank you. And of course, it's essential to our SCAP. So I'm glad we're talking about it. I just have one question for this round before we hear from the public. And that is if you can help me clarify and or connect something up. And that is on our BPTP page on our website, there's a link to a survey. And it's a safety survey. And so I was trying to square that with our phases, which talk about a development, talked about community surveys in phase 2. And then when we talk about later slide, 1 second, yes, the baseline conditions analysis, and we have safety and collisions. It talks about analyzing data, but it doesn't mention that survey result. So why on the BPTP website do we have a survey that's with a deadline of December 31st, so it's this month, but it's not referenced in here as far as I can tell. And I did listen as hard as I could to your explanation about the BPTP and the SS4A action plan, but yet it's on the BPTP page on our website. So what's going on?
No, that's a great question. And the short answer is it's the Safe Systems for All Action Plan survey that is also related to the BPTP in the context of bicycle and pedestrian safety. So we kind of want to just take the opportunity to also promote it as part of our website, even though it's really the Safe Systems survey. But again, it's useful information for us to use and inform our existing conditions analyses.
And if I could just provide a little bit of additional clarification. So the Safe Streets for All action plan is really for all modes, whereas the bicycle and pedestrian transportation plan is really focused on active transportation, so walking and rolling. So the survey has crossover to both those plans, the findings of the survey. So if, for example, the findings are that, we're trying to determine an unsafe network for bicycle and pedestrians. Then the findings from that would be relevant to not only policy that can come out of the Safe Streets for All action plan, but also actual project implementation that can come out of the bicycle and pedestrian transportation plan. Does that make sense?
I think so. I think what's interesting though is like on our website, when it, after it goes through, the project description for the BPTP, objective, scope of work, project status, community engagement, it is the thing that's first there on online survey as if it's part of that plan. So we may want to just clarify that a little bit. And I guess my question is, given what you just said about the breadth of its impact and using that data, is there a reason we don't have it on this slide in our safety analysis that we wouldn't? So maybe I'm still not quite capturing that.
We can certainly add it as a part of that. I mean, it's the more data, the merrier for sure. Again, it came in light as a part of the Safe Systems Action Plan, and we thought it was a good opportunity to understand that overlap between the two efforts and not maybe do another potential survey as part of the BPTP update to maybe fatigue the community on like maybe too many surveys.
But I'm sorry, just to clarify, the data will feed into both plans and projects. And just to give like a little bit of short history, the bicycle and pedestrian transportation plan, when we started this project, one of the tasks within it was to develop, to determine what was needed to develop a safe systems approach policy, to develop Vision Zero policy, all of these things that are components of what we actually got a grant award for, which was the Safe Streets for All action plan. So we ended up getting the grant after we started this process, and we determined that we were going to try and determine what resources we need. And then we got awarded a grant, which is going to really expedite that. And so they're connected. The data will actually feed into both projects. So it's not listed on the slide, but the data will feed into both of the projects. And that's why it's listed on actually both project web pages.
Okay, that's exactly the answer I was hoping for, is that it would feed in. And just so the public would know, I'm certainly not suggesting duplicative surveys, that if we get survey fatigue. But what I wanted to make sure is that the public would know that we have this on our BPTP website, and we're going to actually use it here, because here it just references collision data, and I think we want to get that survey data in there. I just want to make sure the public knows that when they do what they're told on our website, we will actually use it. And it sounds like you're all over that. It's just a communication thing.
Yeah, and also to note, and as it's been communicated, like there's been blog posts and other communications, they've all been referenced together because there's so much crossover between the two plans. So yeah, you're absolutely correct. I also want to note that I haven't checked it for a while, but we've gotten a substantial amount of responses on both the interactive map and the survey.
That's great. Good. Okay. Well, good. And now we know we're going to tie it in to this. So thank you so much.
Ed?
Yes, two. Number one, on the high injury networks, I'm sure you already have a lot of data on that as a starting point for your hypotheses. And I read in here what the plan is. You end up with sort of an ABC in terms of, very high and medium high and a little bit lower in terms of the danger there. And then you sort of prioritize that. And coupled with that, I would presume, but I'm going to ask the question, that if there's some, almost emergency level right now, that you're just going to go ahead and fix that. We're not going to wait 2 years until we figure out where it comes out in the rankings, because we already know that one's pretty tough.
Well, yeah, that's actually what we already do.
Right.
So yeah, yes. So to note that's what we already do. We don't necessarily wait, but yeah, you're absolutely right. It's going to help us to prioritize projects, potential projects.
Yeah, I just want this on the record for the public, that you are still gonna, it's not, well, we're gonna stop now and rank them and then figure out what to do, because you already know that. So that work's gonna continue. But okay. And then the second one is just a question about the multi-day collaborative work sessions. Are those intended for the public? And could you just break out what that's gonna look like? Is it sort of a typical charts and sticky notes and things like that around tables, or how's that gonna work?
A mix of events, and we haven't planned out everything yet. We have a few tools and methods to choose from. So one thing we'd like to do is a walk audit or a bike audit. So identify a location, pick the time to go out, a number of people, just see what's going on, right? We were talking about earlier how you sometimes really have to feel it to know and experience it to know. And another thing we will likely do is what's called a star analysis, where it is community members around a table mapping out desire lines or like where they want to go, and like start creating an ideal or vision network. And then we may have other types of activities as well, depending on the exact timing.
Good, that's exactly what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Okay.
Nadia?
I was curious, and I didn't see it listed, but I'm sure it's probably happening, how you're doing bike counts and traffic counts. Like, what is the methodology? What data do we use? Do we have sensors that we use? That kind of what feeds how busy the network is already? And I thought we had something, many head of transportation people ago that talked about that, but I didn't see anything in your presentation about how we use the existing data. And then I did notice in the staff report that it talks about collision data that goes only 5 years back, which seems like it might not be the best data to collect because of the pandemic, and you might want to go back further to get particularly more of the student data, because otherwise your data is a bit biased towards the time when the kids weren't riding. And so if you could say more about that, that'd be great.
Yes, okay, so existing data, right? I believe that currently the city of Palo Alto has manual counts conducted at some locations. I think the last counts were collected a couple of years ago. We will certainly look at that data, but as part of the activity and demand analysis, we're also going to pull in big data sources that use cell phone data. So to supplement the lack of counts. And as also an outcome of this plan, and I believe of the last plan too, was a recommendation for a count program establishing more consistent counts in the city that get on the ground counts. The second question about collision data and history, this is a comment we received in a prior meeting as well, and we do understand the limitations of that time period. However, federal guidance for some grants requires a 5-year time period. There are also certain challenges with going longer in terms of what roadway changes might have occurred. So a location that might have had a crash 9 years ago could have been upgraded. So there's data limitations any way you go. One thing we are going to do to help tell a more long-term picture is pull 10 years of data from transportation injury mapping system, a website mapping tool, to give that 10-year snapshot, but we are going to base the high injury network and collision profile analysis on the 5-year period for the reasons I mentioned before.
And for cell phone data, are you using something like streetlight data, or?
We have access to a streetlight data set. We, in our scope, we've proposed using Replica, which is similar.
Well, good. That last clarification is great. We had about 10 years ago, or I don't know, about a 5-year period, installed sensors that picked up bikes and I think even PEDs, and I don't remember the technology, and it seems to have gone by the wayside, and I asked about what happened and when, and maybe it's really no longer a good technology given what we can do with, and given the, at least that high schoolers are going to have cell phones, but we do have a huge school commute program that's one of the strongest in the country, and elementary students are not going to have cellular data. So I really want to make sure that we capture that. Of course, our Safe Routes to School program has their own really good information or very good information that could complement what we're able to get through other sources. Phil, was there something you on that? Okay. And I can't think of any significant roadway changes that we've had in recent years that would have changed that, but there might be exceptions, but not much.
Actually, if I can say, it doesn't even have to be a significant roadway change. It could be a somewhat insignificant roadway change that changes behavior. So
Yeah, the only real one in the last 5 years I can think of is what happened on Ross. I'm at a loss to think of.
So that would be a significant one.
Yeah.
So we have really insignificant ones, you know, like you could use an example of an area where potentially there were collisions that were occurring because of sightlines, and we added like 10 feet of red curb to increase sightlines.
I see.
There's so many of those that have occurred
Okay.
just in the past year. You know, to go back more than 5 years, you're really dealing with a lot of things that can influence.
Good. Okay. And then one of the other bodies that we may want to consider engaging with is both our school board, and then for that matter, some of our private schools that are not so strongly involved with our state Safe Routes to School program. Now, the Safe Routes School program is a partnership between the city and the schools and really the PTA council group, and it's very strong. One of the reasons I bring up the school board is because a number of us have had an interest over the years of trying to cause the school leadership, the administration, and the board to be even more engaged with the importance of Safe Routes to School. And I think this would be an appropriate occasion to really try to draw them into the discussion in a way greater than what they've been in the past. And then one of the things, have you looked at, you spoke about essentially micromobility, and that the plan is really not just bikes and pedestrians, but the growing range of micromobility vehicles. And then you also spoke about active transportation. It strikes me that level 3 is it e-bikes are really not active. They're for the most part lower speed motorcycles, electric motorcycles. So where we draw those lines, they still are an increasing presence, but I think looking at that forces us to struggle with this unresolved issue of where do they belong? Do you put them in segregated bike lanes, or do you separate them from it? And I think there's a really important issue that many agencies and the state haven't really dealt with yet, but it's critically important. And one of the, I think on I'm going to look at another couple of notes I have on another document here. One of the questions that I think we need to early on address that is very much related to this committee, which is we have a dilemma of the timeline for this plan versus a need and a wish to accelerate our decisions on locations of bike and ped crossings over, or I should say under, the Caltrain corridor. And part of the consideration is whether it's really important for us to do those sooner and have them hopefully in place when we begin construction of vehicular separations. The vehicular separations probably would have continuity of crossing there, but it doesn't mean it's the same for thousands of kids crossing the tracks as well as others. And so we've struggled with wanting to move this set of decisions forward on bike and ped, in particular in South Palo Alto. And so have you also looked already at what was the year of the rail study? Is that part of the documents that were on the list?
That is part of the documents that's.
And 2013, yeah. And have you looked at the comparative distance in Palo Alto where we lack bike and ped crossings for separated crossings in the community, where there are none separated from California Avenue to San Antonio, whereas we have several in North Palo Alto existing. And then even unseparated crossings, the longest distance is from or any kind of crossing, I should say, is from Oregon and Cal Ave down to East Meadow. And the prioritization of addressing that versus other crossings that we're going to be considering going forward, has that been yet part of what's looked at as a high level context on both the timing priority, that we don't want to wait 2 years to get to a decision on being able to make ourselves eligible for funding for bike and ped crossings of the Caltrain corridor, and where those should be the highest priority?
I can jump in here, and then if folks want to provide more context, the short answer, Councilmember Burt, would be yes. The crossings will be evaluated, and I think that's why I wanted to show that last slide that bullet points the previous direction. And one of them is specifically calling out South Palo Alto crossing in the vicinity of Adobe Creek, consistent with the 2013 rail corridor study. So recognizing that there's an interest to understand and evaluate different locations for grade separation as it relates to bike and ped projects. What I'll say, and maybe Amanda, if you want to speak more on how we develop that network, is we want, again, look at it in the context of the entire bicycle network, right? And so part of how we develop that network is establishing the criteria that allows us to score these different projects. One of the selection criteria can include distance to a grade separation facility as a means to prioritize certain projects. But again, we want to make sure that we evaluate these different crossings in the context of the entire network.
So given that we already have a bike and ped plan that basically recognized the network and had identified these, one of the concerns is that we're saying, well, we want to update it. This is going to be a great and valuable exercise, but why should we be acting as if we're starting from ground zero, as opposed to, no, we've actually already identified these things tentatively for a decade. And if we need to do an update to that, how do we move that forward so it's not awaiting a 2-year process to be able to say what we had identified previously, we've refined a bit, it's still solid, and we get that in the next few months rather than 2 years. And we can then move forward on decisions of pursuing funding and not lose what are some exceptional opportunities in this era for major funding for those crossings.
So,
But that funding eligibility is dependent on selecting a preferred alternative and initial design.
So I'll answer that, and just to go into a little bit of detail, but just to note that we're following the process that council directed us to do with this. So council directed us to analyze this within the BPTP, to include it, and in the contract that was approved by council and the direction. This is the path that we had said that we're going to say. Now, the second part of that question, the details that need to fill that in, is Ozzy can work on one project right now, and really he's working on 2 projects right now, but he's really tied up in working on updating the BPTP, which is looking at the network holistically as described. And at the same time, we're trying to hire a staff that can take out and take the work that is necessary, the substantial amount of work that's necessary, as you heard about earlier, cost inflating in Mountain View to create additional bicycle and pedestrian crossings. So we're trying to hire staff that can really take that work and really dive into it in a more project level specificity, right? So Aussie is working on the entire bicycle and pedestrian network. The entirety of that plan, the concept behind it is to look at the network holistically. So that's what Aussie's doing. The challenge is that he can't, like, if the direction from council was for him only to work on this, only to work on.
Let me just clarify. That's not what I said. So let's not frame it that way.
But just to be clear, what you said is to have that done in the next 2 months. Well, Aussie has other things, and Aussie and the consultant are working on other things in the next 2 months.
I actually didn't say two, but the issue is, as I attempted to frame it, is how do we move forward the ability to focus effort on being able to make ourselves eligible for funding for bike and ped crossings in months rather than years, and in a way that does not hinder our sequencing on our whole grade separation program. I will say that when this went to the council, you said that this was following council direction, but there was no in-depth discussion about the ramifications of that at the council that I recall, of the very thing that I'm discussing here. And if we need to go to the council, because I know that the rail committee last year and this year has expressed this concern and sentiment. And if we need to go to the council to get that clarification, then this committee can do that. We've several times asked, when's the next opportunity to bring rail-related matters to the council, which included this? And we haven't had that opportunity for that discussion. So if that's the necessity, then this committee can simply insist upon an agendizing, focusing on that. We were looking at being able to aggregate a number of rail-related items to go to the council. We've been kind of anxiously awaiting that. And if we need to parcel that out, that's something that this committee could decide to do if there was consensus on that. So we can wait until later after discussion to see where and if we want to go any further in that direction. At this time, why don't we turn to members of the public, both here in the room and remotely, for comments. Oops, sorry.
Sorry, can I just note that the city manager, Ed Shikata's turned on his camera and I think probably has a comment.
Okay.
Actually, no comment to make at this point. Just wanted to make sure you knew I was present and happy to participate in the conversation as needed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Our first speaker is Ken Joy. Yes, you can come up and just press that button.
Thank you for the opportunity to make comments. Thank you to the consultant for coming today and staff for working on the project. Almost everything I was going to say has already been addressed. So I'll just succinctly say that if you're looking to make pedestrian or bicycle grade separations on the other side of Oregon Expressway, I think something near Loma Verde would be a clear priority over something near Adobe Creek. The other thing I would like to add is I hope that when this process unfolds, that we don't merely carry forward everything that's been in the last two iterations of the bike pedestrian transportation plan, because we need to make sure that we prioritize things. The current plan from 2012 includes something from 2003 around Quarry Road, but currently, there are 7 places to have a grade separated crossing on this side of Oregon Expressway. And as been noted, there are none on the other side of town. So I would hope that we would say Quarry Road should be deprioritized compared to something like Lunenburg. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Amy Ashton.
Hello, I'm just speaking today as a daily Caltrain bike commuter, pretty much for my entire adult life. And I am here to advocate for the units that we know are coming on Cal Ave, about 400 of them, as well as likely over 1,000 within a half mile to 3/4 of a mile of the Caltrain station at Cal Ave, as well as several track crossings. And we need to just ensure that these new neighbors have convenient, safe, easy, intuitive, well-signed access to the underpasses and to the stations themselves. As a CEQA professional consultant who regularly refers to these plans as part of project analyses, I want to agree with the previous speaker. These need to be simple and easy to use. Improvements have to be easy to find and easy to put to use. Put background material and appendices, keep the document short and simple. Prioritize the most essential improvements so that implementation is something we can really achieve. Let's not forget that developers can be on the hook for ped bike improvements, but only if they are planned for and clearly delineated and easy to find in documents like this. A 400-page document will be put on the shelf and not essentially utilized. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Our next speaker is Eric Nordman.
Hello, I just wanted to reiterate the importance of building the pedestrian and bicycle crossings before the construction begins. The construction process has been estimated to take 6 years, and knowing how construction processes are, it will probably take longer. And it's very important that construction projects are inherently stressful, and for both cars and for bicyclists, but particularly for vulnerable users. I also wanted to clarify that level 2 e-bikes are the ones that have a throttle that are like a motorcycle, and level 3 bikes are pedal assist, but they do have a 28 mile per hour max speed. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Carrie Wagner.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I want to thank Councilman Burke for bringing up the fact that we need more crossings. We need crossings, pedestrian bike crossings in South Palo Alto. There are currently no protected crossings. It's, as several speakers have said, it's so important to have this in place before construction. We have hundreds, literally hundreds of middle and high school students who bike across the railroad tracks every day to get to Gunn and the various middle schools here in the South. During the construction, if their parents are concerned that they're not going to be able to get through that area safely, that is going to be a real detriment. We definitely don't want more cars on the road during the construction either. That won't help anyone. Basically, anyone in South Palo Alto who bikes or walks needs to be able to go east to west. And right now, that's really difficult. Like Councilman Burke pointed out, the stretch between the Oregon Underpass and East Meadow is quite long. If you live anywhere in there, you've got to go a long way before you're able to cross. So please, can we please? The other thing is, I'm really heartened by the fact that this committee's moved pretty quickly on the Seal versus Kellogg underpass. I think that bodes well to the decision process, and I'm hoping that you can move equally quickly on a crossing in South Palo Alto. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Steve Rosenblum.
Hi again, this is Steve Rosenblum. I'm speaking now as a representative of Reconnect Palo Alto, which is a Palo Alto citizens group, which is promoting the viaduct as the best solution for the rail crossings. As has become clear from the discussion, the whole issue of bike and pedestrian transportation and the rail crossings are all a city planning issue. It's not just fixing one street or one crossing. We have to figure out how to improve accessibility and mobility for the entire city. And we should avoid a tunnel vision, which is a pun intentionally. The solution to all our crossing problems are not tunnels. If we were to build a viaduct, all the crossings are level. There's no underpasses, no need for worrying about handicap accessibility. Everybody's rolling along or walking along on the level. And there's good visibility at all the crossings because there's no need to go underground or control traffic at the entrances of exits of tunnels. And if we consider that if there was a viaduct, there would be accessibility to bikes and peds under the viaduct. There could be spaces for children to ride bicycles, for example, in a safe environment once they got under the viaduct area. Then there's the aesthetic issue. There's a clear view from east to west under the viaduct so that people can see both sides. And I think the suggestion by Amanda of a star analysis is really an excellent idea. We need to understand where people are and where they want to get to and not how they're forced to travel today. We can't be limited by how they have to navigate, for example, as clearly pointed out in the Meadow to California Avenue stretch, that there's a long way they have to go to get across. They shouldn't have to do that, and that we shouldn't be limited by that kind of vision. The final point is that at the Pally crossing at Churchill during school start and end times, there's huge congestion at Churchill Avenue. And I don't see how a tunnel at Kellogg is going to help that situation at all. There'll still be huge congestion at that tunnel. Now it's bad enough where it's a level crossing. I can't imagine the chaos that's going to occur when there's motorized as well as pedal bicycles and pedestrians all mixing together. So I think the viaduct is the best solution for the city as a whole. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Bruce Arthur.
Well, a lot of this has been covered before, but I want to say, I do believe we need to have separated bike pedestrian crossings in South Palo Alto. They were on the old bike plan. They can be acted on to get started soon. It may need council's energy or this committee's energy to start that. I think that is worth it. I think we need them, period. We need them before we start construction. And the city has a long tradition of making grand plans and doing lots of surveys and getting great results in the long term. But sometimes we have to act, this is data we had 10 years ago with the bike plan. And I'd like to say we can consider doing those things sooner rather than later. That's it.
Our next speaker is Penny Elson.
So clearly, thanks. Clearly, my feedback colleagues and I should have talked before the meeting because they hit on two things I wanted to talk about. One is prioritization of projects. Thanks, Ken, for that. And secondly, I wanted to talk about South Palo Alto grade separated crossings, especially for bicyclists in this interim period. I think it's going to be really important if we want to maintain walking and biking to school through the construction periods of our grade separation projects. We don't know what option we're going to have in South Palo Alto, and I understand that not knowing the long-term plans for Meadow and Charleston does affect like where we put that crossing, but I think we need to start making headway. And I have to say, I find it a little worrisome that in today's presentation we have, we're sort of making more specific plans for Seal and Kellogg and the North Palo Alto stuff, and we are still like nowhere on South Palo Alto. It's worrisome. And I think we really need to start doing a hard push on that. And I think South Palo Alto has nothing at all And we need something, and we're gonna need something during construction for the kids. They can't ride their bicycles on San Antonio Road. And I do want to mention, I wanted to add on to Amy Ashton's comment that, yes, we're putting hundreds of units around California Avenue and El Camino Real, but I do want to remind everyone that the lion's share of that housing is landing in South Palo Alto. These kids are going to be crossing the streets. We're gonna have to do some work to get them to school from all the locations that the high school is on the other side of the tracks from where all that housing is planned. So I think that needs to be part of our thought process here. Thanks so much.
We have no further requests to speak.
Okay, let's bring it back to the committee for additional discussion. Who would like to go first? All right, Ed, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to echo the chair's concern and the number of public comments concerned about getting going on these grade set underpasses, particularly South Palo Alto. We're also going to be having some housing to speak to Ms. Elson on El Camino, which is going to actually have the same problem, which is on the other side of on the way to the tracks. So to the extent that we can work out a plan to get that thing going, I know that there's been, frankly, a couple of years at least of very high level, high volume of comments from the public and council members and council candidates that we need to get moving on that. So we'd love to work that into the schedule without disrupting not only workload, but all the other stuff we're trying to get done. That really seems to be a high priority. I like the organization of this. I think it looks actually really good, well planned. I think it can be productive. And I say that without reference to any other consultants, but I think this one looks really solid. So you've got the timeline in a sensible way and the outcomes. And I already asked the question about the workshops. You had one thing back that I didn't ask last time that I had the mic back on helping marginalized folks as part of the action items there. And does that mean with equipment? Or does that mean with training or just access to the equipment or what?
Like issues. So in terms of inclusive engagement strategy.
Yeah.
Yes, we do have some budget set aside for translation or interpretation services if that is requested.
Okay. That's what you talked about there.
That is likely how it will manifest here for this project. Yeah, we may also choose to cite our engagements near to East Palo Alto or Stanford University where there are equity priority communities.
Oh, cool. Cool. Yeah, I mean, we want, usually when you do marketing, you have a target.
Right.
Well, our target is everybody who's not yet on a bike or not on a bike often enough. So I appreciate that sort of wide target that you have, but there's also specific strategies to get to that wide target. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
Sure. No, I just, I think we all hear loud and clear, the South Palo Alto crossings, the prioritization of them in terms of timing, that predate the construction. In the slide on previous direction from City Council and Rail, it does talk about the Seal versus Kellogg Avenue that we've made some headway on. But it talks about the Adobe Creek crossings, Meadow Drive, Loma Verde. Can you talk a little bit about how we could accelerate these a little more, how we can ensure that we meet what we're hearing here in terms of prioritizing them?
Yeah, so thank you. We included in this scope a separate task that comes out earlier than the completion of the entire bicycle and pedestrian plan for the specific South Palo Alto additional bike and ped crossings. That's in task, I'm gonna remember this wrong, 5, I believe. So that's how we've expedited it within the project. And also we're trying to hire a senior planner in order to work on that. And so that's what's going to help us to expedite it. We do believe that we can do that within the the timing necessary in order to apply for grants. So we do believe that we'll be able to get a project moving that would be ready to apply for grants, because we can't, in my mind, have a successful application at the current level of planning that we have. So there's a level of planning, as we've learned from the grade separation grant applications, that we need to get to in order to compete for this high level of funding. So that's how we've set it up in the process. That's what the current direction was to do. And regarding Kellogg and Seal, which just noting is a little bit different from the South Palo Alto crossings, because the Kellogg versus Seal discussion is the actual bicycle and pedestrian crossing for Churchill, as opposed to South Palo Alto, where those are additional crossings that would be considered in consideration of the fact that when we build any crossings in South Palo Alto, we would make sure that there is an option for bicycles and pedestrians to cross during construction at those locations. So that's the differentiation that's really necessary between these two, is these would be additional crossings, not the crossing as it is at Churchill, additional crossings.
That's great, and that's terrific. And so, however, if we had a crossing somewhere between Cal Ave and Meadow, that also would help during the construction, so that we've sort of, people have developed patterns, behavior patterns to use it, and it can siphon hopefully some people away, in addition to having the bike ped crossings there. Okay, well, so that's helpful. So there, I know there's always a bit of a chicken and egg with the planning, the grant for the plan, but all of that, even though it's integrated in part of the larger plan, is slated to come out earlier than the totality of it. So, okay, so
that's correct.
Am I getting it right? Okay, good. Thank you. That's all I have at the moment.
Nadia?
Thanks. I was just gonna say, on the list of documents, it's on packet page 21. I didn't see the rail corridor study, even though it's obviously called out in your slide. So you'd want to put it down in the list of referring documents to make sure that everybody in the community understands that you looked at it, because otherwise you're gonna have 37 people tell you the same thing. So, also on packet page 22, where you have the vision and goals, I see that this third bullet says developing a network of bikeways, pathways, and traffic calm streets that connects various business districts, residential areas, open spaces, and parks. Obviously at a high level, I think that's correct. I just don't think that there's a bullet here that really represents the emphasis that policymakers have tried, both in the comprehensive plan, in the 2012 bike plan, to talk about the permeability of the rail corridor. It's just not really called out. And so that sentence is encompassing it as it is, doesn't really seem to emphasize what you're, I think, continuing to hear from this committee. And I would encourage you to call it out a little bit more so that it really becomes super obvious. Thank you, Philip, for mentioning when I heard Penny Ellison talk about Seal versus Kellogg. Just as a reminder, the only reason that those are so specific is because it's tied to the Churchill underpass alternative. It's how the pedestrians get through. So it's not that that's being prioritized above the other crossings, because council is giving clear direction on that. And I also wanted to make sure that it's clear to everybody that might be watching that during construction of the grade separations at Meadow and at Charleston, the city will be able to make it so that pedestrians and bicyclists can cross. But parents understandably might be nervous if that's constantly sort of a shifting thing. Nobody wants to run their kids through a construction zone, and that's why there's discussions of these other things. But it's not like you won't be able to cross in those construction spots. I just want to make that clear for those that are adults and will be able to go through those crossings. I think it's important to call that out. I will say that all of the planning documents kind of point towards something in the vicinity of Loma Verde really being the highest priority, which I think you're hearing again and again. And I had a question about, is it possible as we apply for funding? I recognize we're not as far along in the planning process as we might like, but we do have, I wonder whether Measure B money might be able to be applied to some of this. And another question about whether the money that was raised under the business tax could be put down as a matching funding to be able to score some more grants. I don't know how that works, but it's a tactic that we might think about, and being able to say, look, we've got matching funds that could make these dollars go further. And does that help us in our planning?
Yeah, thank you. I'll try to answer that as best I can. Just I think VTA didn't give us an official response as to whether we could use the funding, but I think they told us no, unofficially. So I think they told us unofficially we could not use the funding for additional crossings. They said you can build a bike and ped tunnel like you are at Churchill, where it's separate, and they would consider that as part of the project. You could build the bike and ped crossing at the crossing, as we have proposed in all the other alternatives for Charleston and Meadow, or, you know, and they will consider that as the project. But additional crossings, they basically told us they would need to talk to legal, and then they kind of said no. But regarding the business tax, I do believe that would be a possibility in leveraging grants, and you always need local match when you're applying for grants. So having that funding available to us is great, as we're able to leverage it.
Just following up on that issue, I'll note that Measure B also has two other buckets of funding that would potentially apply here. One is the actual bicycle and active transportation fund, which I think was only 50 million for the county, but it's still there and something we could pursue. And the other is the discretionary fund that was for improved roadway conditions, but for cities that had a PCI score well below what we are. We have those discretionary dollars, and that's what we had used for 3 years, I think, for our grade separation review. And then what BTA and Senator Becker's staff and others had emphasized to us is that there are other active transportation dollars that would be available for this sort of dedicated crossing. And they have pushed us to move forward as quickly as possible to not lose that window of opportunity for those funds, because this is a period where they're available. They have not been available to this degree in the past, and they're not assuming that they'll be this available indefinitely. And that's one of the reasons that we've been pushing to try to accelerate this. The other being that we want to try to have this in place before the vehicular crossings are constructed. And as Nadia noted, yes, we've received assurances for several years that when we construct those East Meadow and Charleston crossings, there would still be some means to have bikes and ped cross. But it's hard to imagine that it would be comparable to where we are now, or comparable to a separated condition. That we're talking about hundreds, if not thousands, of kids crossing through a construction zone for several years. That just doesn't resonate well. And if we can at least reduce that through moving forward with something that's been long anticipated, then I think that's a priority. So I want to kind of revisit how we move forward with prioritizing a crossing in this vicinity of Loma Verde, which actually we had even done an extensive study of looking at whether we could have on the east side of Alma. We did a study on utilizing the Matadero Creek corridor, the Valley Water District land, did a pop-up event and extensive work on that. It really didn't, it wasn't really feasible except for some segments of that right away. And so it still may be able to be part of what we would do if we located the route as El Carmelo, or what's the one street north of El Carmelo, I forget. Either of those could utilize, well, probably more El Carmelo potentially would use a block from, I think Bryant to Cowper is a candidate area for that. In any event, that segment and a crossing in that vicinity, I want to bring up that there was a discussion about equity. Well, the Ventura neighborhood remains a neighborhood that has more modest income and both multifamily and otherwise housing. It's going to have in that area, as some of the speakers noted, a huge amount of new housing, and there are no schools between the tracks and El Camino. And right now, those children have to cross El Camino generally westbound to go to schools in the Barron Park area. With this crossing, the school district could realign those students into schools like Loma Verde and have a safe crossing to school and not cross a very dangerous state highway for elementary kids and middle school kids to get to school. And I don't think we've adequately been recognizing that. I've had discussions with school board members who are deeply concerned. They brought this issue up when we had it's called the North Ventura Coordinated Area Plan, which was the master development of that area, raising the issue that they don't have schools. We used to have a school in that sector called Ventura School. It was shut down 35 years ago. And now we're adding a whole bunch of thousands potentially of new residents in that area, who knows how many school children, without any school. And so safe route there is a very important equity and child safety route that will be exacerbated by this new development. And this has been high in my mind, and I'm not sure it's really been appreciated. It's one of the reasons, not the only one, that this needs to be prioritized. So then I want to, within all that context, go back to Philip had referenced what he thought was task 5, which was attempting to move forward this this project ahead of the complete plan. I need to understand moving it how much forward and when. What we didn't have any approximate timing to any of that. And given that we are working on bringing in a additional staff person or consultant on that.
Yeah, so just want to say that we have a staff that council, a new staff member that council approved in order to do this. But I do want to note that at least so far we've been unsuccessful in our recruitment, and we're going to have to go back out again. So it's a staff member, not a consultant.
And so aside from the timing of adding that staff member, when we were having this back and forth on wanting to get going as soon as possible on first the decision that we're going to prioritize a given location for a bike and ped crossing and not wait for the plan completion. And to some extent, we've prioritized it in task 5. But I'm just still not clear what that means. So that goes into the question I have is, do we need to go back to the council to have the council give greater clarity, or how much clarity is there under this task 5?
I'm actually trying to look at task 5, but apparently my network is not working any longer. I'm not sure if you have it handy, so just to note, the steps that we have that are going on right now is to collect the community data, to compile all of the data that we have, to look at the network. And so that's what needs to occur in order for us to get to the task 5. So Ozzy, can you provide clarity? Because I'm unable to open this.
Right, and maybe Amanda can jump in and clarify what it needs to get to the network analysis, but essentially we need to go through the sequence of steps to get to that task 5. And what that means is understanding the existing conditions, as well as then understanding the needs and concerns of residents, and then start to develop those recommendations. So task 5 will include a memo that speaks to these grade separations, crossings, and that will come before the draft and final plan. Amanda, do you want to jump in and speak to how we develop that network through the prioritization criteria?
Yes, I can do that. So the technical analysis that I outlined previously, the high collision network, the activity and demand analysis, the level of traffic stress, and all of the input from community engagement really feeds into our understanding of which alignment or route might be the one that we prioritize. We will be developing a set of prioritization criteria in the needs and concerns phase that when we come next, we will have a prioritization framework to look at. And then once we have identified or determined that, then we'll be developing those concepts I think that you're looking for. And that's task 5, and that will be the recommendations.
Yeah, if we can share the project overview and timeline slide, that might be helpful to tie this in. But
yeah, that's I think that's actually, is that slide 1 on the second?
Yeah, slide 1.
Sorry,
that was slide 1.
Still learning.
Anyway, yeah, I'm fine with that, but I see that. So this goes back to kind of circling back to our earlier discussion and what we're building off of versus what we're starting over. And I don't believe that we need to have a complete review and restarting of a network analysis to know what we have known for. Actually, so I'll go back more than 15 years ago when I was still on the planning commission, almost 20 years ago, and we prioritized this location at that time. And then it was prioritized in that the last bike and ped master plan as a location because we knew it was essential for the network. It's not rocket science at a high level. I'm not talking about the precise location and the precise design. I'm talking about whether this is a fundamental gap in the network today. It was prioritized within the 2013 rail corridor study. This doesn't need to be redetermined. And if the current thinking is that without the council stepping in and clarifying that that's already part of what we understand to be a crucial network gap, and we want to proceed on that ahead of these more systematic approaches that are ideal and necessary for the whole system, then I think we need to get it back to the council to provide that clarity.
Herbert,
Yeah.
it was actually specifically called out by the council in, I think, 2018 to actually a little bit later. It was taken out of the rail corridor study and given to the NVCAP. And then I don't know whatever happened. And so
Well,
when that,
I had that clarification from one of the members of the NVCAP committee. It was referred to the NVCAP rather than the rail corridor study because they were actively having a coordinated area plan that was focused and was going to be complete sooner, and to put it in that active area. And for reasons that are not clear, it was not brought forward by staff within that context. It simply didn't become part of that plan, despite the fact the council gave that direction. So this is a whole series of over 20 years saying this is a priority. And I think this committee needs to decide whether they want to request that this be agendized to the council as soon as possible so that we can get clarity and all get on the same page. And so I'm interested in my colleagues on, well, I guess I want to ask the city manager in that context. We had been talking about kind of wanting to bring several rail related items together to the council. And that's preferable. And so I just kind of want to ask where we are on next update to the council on rail issues, where we seek council determination or guidance on certain things, and whether this would need to, if it was the will of this committee to get it to the council with a recommendation to prioritize it and not await this the network study. How soon could that go to the council? Would it be part of a package on rail, or would it best be come forward as a single item?
Yeah, let me consider that out loud, if you don't mind. And, as to standalone versus packaged with others, it perhaps depends on the status of the other issues and readiness to go. When we talk about this issue in and of itself, I think the context, again, from my involvement on the discussions that led us to this point, that I recall from the council direction on incorporating this issue of the crossing location as a part of the overall BPTP was to ensure that the connectivity of the crossings reflected the citywide needs. And, I think that that's what staff has been pursuing. Perhaps the practical side of that is, to a certain extent, no matter where the crossing is located, you can expect some level of localized concerns, if not outright opposition. And so it was using the overall planning process, BPTP planning process, as a way to ensure that the context is provided such that as those very localized concerns are raised, that the council and city has that to rely on going forward. I think the challenge with pushing forward on the crossing location now would be that you have the potential to confront that kind of concern. So I think that's the balancing act that we're trying to maintain. So perhaps the question for Philip and staff is there an early point, rather than waiting for the full plan to be completed, at which sufficient clarity has been defined through this ongoing planning process to be able to come forward and say, we've confirmed that based on the evaluation of needs and options, that this is the preferential crossing location. So Philip, is that possible, or what would the trade-off be in bringing that forward? I guess presumably trade-off with other products from the plan.
Now, well, excuse me, just to note that is how the plan was outlined. So that's why it occurs in task 5 as opposed to, I don't know what the last task is here. But that's why it occurs earlier. So it was laid out in the thing. In the task order, let's see, the final task is task 8. So just noting that's why it was included in task 5, is so that we can pull it out. But to note, any type of expediting this in any regard is going to require staff, unless it comes at the expense of something else that we're working on. So that's really the trade-off that we have right here, is that in order to keep moving the plan forward, I need Ozzy to keep working on the plan. In order for Ozzy to work on car-free streets, I need him working on that. That's the trade-off there.
So let me just say that my assumption is, first step is not to determine a precise set of routes on that. It is that general, what we've described is in the general location of Loma Verde and Matadero Creek. We have issues on east of Alma on which exact route you'd use to connect it to Middlefield. We have issues east of or west of El Camino on Matadero Creek, or on Matadero Road versus the Valley Water right away there. But that's the second step, not this first level one, which is, are we prioritizing going forward a grade separation in the vicinity of Loma Verde. Then once we've determined that and said we don't need to do another network study to determine what network studies have determined successively for 20 years, which the map shows it's the greatest distance in the whole city without a crossing of both Alma and the railway. We don't have a traffic signal between near Meadow and all the way to Churchill. And so there's no crossing there. This is why for 20 years it was already prioritized. I just don't think we need to reinvent the wheel there. We don't have to do a network study to know what successive network studies have determined for 20 years. It's not going to change that. So the question is, do we need to have that clarification from the council so that there's no ambiguity? Then we have the issues of staffing the resources to then take the next step, but not awaiting the network study. And that next step, if we had already authorized an additional staffing person, in part to accelerate things like this, because for the very reasons that Philip had pointed out, that we can't use Aussie for multiple major projects at the same time. We recognize that. That's why we authorized that staffing position, was to try to help accelerate this very process. And so it could be that we all agree that either through the council action or not needing to go through council, that we're going to peel this off from awaiting the whole network study, because it's a decided issue. And then we have to have the staffing to then take it the next step and go through that process of figuring out the best location and start looking at a preliminary design. That's the next step. But that doesn't preclude us from saying we're not going to hold this back for the network study and other aspects of the very valuable and important plan that we're going to do. So given that, I guess I want to go back to the city manager. It sounds like unless staff says, okay, we get it, and we'll peel it out, we would otherwise need to go to the council for clarification. And so I'm looking to the city manager on, is that clarification needed? And if so, how soon could we get it before the council?
And if I could, let me pull on that thread a bit further. And it is what may be something of a need for clarification on expectations for what benefit there is to have a general vicinity identified versus a specific, I'll use the term intersection for lack of, just for visualizing it. As chairs pointed out, I think our experience in looking for a route, not necessarily a crossing, but a route in this vicinity has always come down to the very specifics of what's a viable route and what has some fatal flaw to it. So I hate to say it, but I get the sense that we need a specific location to be identified in order to be useful for enabling the city to move to the next phase. That would be project development for a bike pit crossing. Let me, if I could, get that either confirmation or maybe a different perspective from our professional staff and from the chair.
And I'm sorry, just to make sure, I might have this incorrect, so I hope you can jump in because Ozzy just stepped away. But I think what we're talking about is 6 months right now. We're talking about 6 months from when we could have that
difference
done to get to that task 5, that thing. So I don't I think maybe there's an assumption that it's further out because of the scale of the whole plan, but we're not talking about completing the entire plan before completing this. But I absolutely would concur with what the city manager said. That was actually tied to the direction that we received from council, was that we should look at the network as a whole in order to determine its locations.
Well, I'll just add that that's, first, it's 6 months that I think is unnecessary. And it was it's a year and 6 months, 18 months or more since we had this discussion at the end of last year, and a very similar discussion. And so that's really a year and a half that we've lost, we'll have lost for that. And that's assuming that we don't slip anymore, because this whole plan has slipped significantly over the last several years. And over that course of time, we've had an even greater loss of time being able to pursue this. As to the city manager's question of whether we need to identify a precise route location before we can move forward, I don't think so. I think that politically, we need to go in that sequence of prioritizing the location, putting the resources in, and then going through a process on that. The exploration of using the Valley Water Corridor east of Alma was worth pursuing, and had some effort in it, and ultimately wasn't feasible. And then, if I recall correctly, it was pivoted to placing a dedicated lane on Loma Verde, which necessitated taking parking out from an entire side of the street. And we all know the political ramifications of that, and we had pushback. And every time you look at that anywhere in the city, that is a big deal and likely to have pushback. The alternatives are to look at having a quiet or slow street on one of these streets, 1 or 2 streets north of Loma Verde, that are very low traffic volume right now and could be made even lower traffic volume. That may actually require a comp plan amendment, because we have, and I'm not recalling the exact wording, but we have a restriction on street closures. And we may need to just modify that to look at allowing certain restrictions to help facilitate bike travel. And that would need to ultimately be done sooner rather than later. We're allowed, I think, 4 changes per comp plan element per year. So we'd have to get that on the 2024 agenda. But if council has already given guidance that they are open to that, then these things could be done in parallel. I think similarly on the west of El Camino, we'll have some contention on whether to have an off-road path in the Valley Water right away versus the sharrows that we currently have on Matadero Road. Those things are going to take some work, and until we begin that process, we don't begin the process of solving it. So what I want to do is get this started sooner. So as soon as we have the new staff person, or if we have to go out for a consultant, but to be teed up and ready to go, and not wait for something that doesn't need to be waited on. It's just we have, and this is one of the dilemmas where we have very capable people who enter this process, staff and consultants who haven't gone through 20 years of this history and know that, in fact, this has been a priority for that long. We've looked at this multiple times, not to mention that right now, you step back, take a high level view, and this is the biggest gap in the community. We've talked repeatedly in our plans about the east-west corridors. We have great, what we call north-south bike routes. They can be improved, but we have multiple ones, and it's the east-west connections that had been the problem. And this was identified as the biggest problem for 20 years. And I would be okay with waiting if we weren't being reminded by multiple agencies that we need to get going to make ourselves eligible for funding that has not been there in the past and will not likely be there in the future if we wait. And that's not to mention the sequencing to our vehicular crossing construction. So there's all those reasons why I don't see any reason that we have to go through 6 months or maybe 9 months to figure out what we already know and have known for 20 years.
Bert. I would note that there's a 2016, the Midtown Connector Study, that's also not on the list of documents, and you want to put that in because it has in there the review of where you could cross the rail line. City manager at Chicago was talking about picking a specific street. I think streets, as difficult as they are, and I don't mean to diminish it because I hear you on how hard it was with Loma Verde and whatever, it's not your biggest problem. Your biggest problem is actually getting across and under the Caltrain right away. And we now have the information about 4 tracks. We also now have a lot more detailed information on what they're going to require for bike pedestrian undercrossings. And so we're in the best position to be able to finally use that information. Because I think even if we had made it through NVCAP and all these other things, we would have been stifled on the Caltrain side. That's no longer the case. And so I would say that we have a good argument to bring it to council because we've got clarity on that issue. Because your biggest thing is, are you crossing within Matadero Creek? Or is there going to be, there's a utility easement, I think at some point that could also be used, but all those things we now have greater clarity on.
Okay, so yeah, back to you.
Yes, that's it, Chair. I would say this is definitely an action item in and of itself. So would suggest that it be handled standalone. For the committee's consideration, ultimately, if this goes as has been suggested, it's one where the committee is recommending that we get direction from the council for staff to prioritize this. Staff will need to respond. I think to Mr. Cammy's point, I would have to expect that we would be saying that something else will slow down in order to accelerate this decision and the expectation of follow-up after. But that said, I think that that's the prerogative of the council to provide that direction to staff. I would want to consider the 6 months, as Mr. Cammy pointed out, and say from staff perspective, if the committee is inclined to not bring this to council right now, that staff take a look at our schedule to see what can be done to accelerate that 6 months.
Wallace?
I just want to clarify that last point, City Manager. You said if we were not inclined, this committee, to bring it to council right now, that staff could look at whether the 6 months could be reduced. Is that?
That's what I'm suggesting. Now, obviously, I haven't talked to Philip about that, but I think we're going to spend a lot of time getting prepared for this council discussion of can we shorten the 6 months versus staff. Can we see what we can do to shorten that 6 months? So we're
and that shortening it is really a question of whether we have to review again the network plan in order to have an agreement that we have about 5 different documents that have all identified this as being a high priority gap in the network. And so that goes back to, is that really necessary to go through that process again? Or can we let the network plan go forward, but pull this off under an understanding that it's well established that it's a crucial link in the network and it needn't await that. Still dependent on getting the staffing on board and proceeding with the next steps to be able to proceed on the next steps. But That's the question is if we don't need to take it to council, if we have agreement with staff that it doesn't have to go through that reevaluation of the network. If it does, then we need to take it to the council, in my mind.
Right. And I think, you know, we'll need to have staff perspective on how to rationalize that recommendation and what that would mean in terms of accelerating next steps.
So I think the only question for me on this piece is, would I support however that turns out to accelerate this? And definitely yes. I mean, it's interesting coming into, you know, I've been cognizant of this for the years. I've lived in Palo Alto throughout this, but not in the weeds, not in depth the way most of the people in this room have. But clearly you can hear the angst and concern and somewhat frustration at the long period it's taken, both from our residents and from my colleagues. So, you know, and logically, it seems like something we should pull off and accelerate. So whatever it takes to get it to council, or if we can avoid that, I'm supportive of.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, it seems to me that what, the city manager is suggesting has to be done anyway, because we know that understandably, something has to be given up, put back on the schedule. So you have to do that whether you do it before you come to us or whether you do it before you come to council. So, I mean, you don't know that off the top of your head, so.
Well, I'm not sure whether the city manager was referring to council agendas or whether he's referring to staff focus, because I think we understand, I am not disputing that we will need the additional resources to come on board before we can then take this policy direction and start moving on it. So that in my mind is not in dispute. It's really, do we need clarity from the council on this as a policy direction, or do we have staff go back and review what we pointed out in this history, and do they concur that there's adequate existing policy that enables us to prioritize that without having to await
I was just trying to get clarity on what the city manager was suggesting.
Yeah.
I think what he was suggesting is that since we have to say anyway, if we're gonna save 2 months or 4 months, you know, this is what's gonna have to be pushed off so that we know and the whole council knows.
But if we're talking about council agenda items,
let me just finish. I don't think we are. I think what Ed was saying is that if he can come back to us in a week or 2 weeks and say, okay, we got a way to figure this thing out, and we can do it, that shortcuts the process and they commit to do it and we don't have to take it to council. That's what I think he was suggesting.
That's exactly it. That's the challenge. Quite frankly, I'm telegraphing to staff through the airwaves here. So we'll see if they can come up with a solution that avoids the need to prepare for a full council discussion and debate on this topic.
That's what I thought, yeah.
Okay, so that would be fine with me. Question is, so we won't have another meeting until January. And we actually have to have a council policy direction to be able to have committee meetings in January. In the next week or so, we're going to take that up. But assuming that goes forward, we have a January rail committee meeting, we could wait to have a final decision on that, or we could just informally ask the city manager to pursue with transportation staff kind of two parallel paths. One is whether they will come back in agreement that this can precede the network analysis. And if not, then be working on when it could, the soonest it could get to the council agenda, if that's not the case. So we don't come back in January and say, well, now we got to look at the next couple of months of council agendas, that these things are done in parallel, if need be.
Yep, fair enough.
Okay.
And it doesn't seem like we have a question about if it's policy or not, because all these documents have been cited.
Right.
And in your experience, which I yield to, has got a lot of,
Well, we don't have that alignment yet with staff. So
Correct.
That's the point.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Then based on the city manager's guidance on that, I'm okay with deferring this to an update in January, and where we'll either get a staff concurrence or get it on the council agenda as soon as possible. Okay. Yes.
May I move on to another topic?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, related. So I'm gonna zoom out a bit on this scope, because I want to go back to the resident input on the overall update. And I don't know if Alice can go to the interactive map and share it, but it's quite impressive and quite interesting for a variety of reasons. And there has been a lot of input so far. And let me ask a question and then make an observation. So I think that the idea of this interactive map of our city, where you can put in where you think infrastructure is needed, where you have a safety concern and other comments, is to get both positive and negative things. And it's a Kittleson map, I think. So for example, riding over here today when I crossed Embarcadero on the bike boulevard of Bryant, so I was approaching it, I just missed the light and I thought, oh, I'm going to sit here forever. But I have to say that little pressure pad was pretty quick when I was able to get across. So that's a plus. And, I could put that down there like that. That's a good thing. Of what troubles me when I ride around town is when I'm going down Lewis, south of near Ohlone, and there's that very fancy, weird intersection that I can't figure out where the bikes go. I feel so stupid. There's so many markings, there's so many drawings, there's so much stuff, and every time I go through there, I decide it's the different one. And so, are those the kinds of things I would note on this interactive map?
Yeah, that's precisely what we're seeking. I mean, that's one example of something that we would want in this, but there's lots. It could be like, there's no facility here, or, this facility needs to be improved, or I need to know how to get to this facility. It's all of those things, or it could just be, I feel unsafe at this area,
Yeah.
or whatever it is.
Okay, that's terrific. And then does this also close up on December 31st like the other? Because this seemed really cool. And so then is this data, along with the future star mapping and the other things, we're going to take all these different ways of getting input. Because what I like about this is you have to have another level of interest to show up for the star mapping. I mean, it's great. And because those people are so dialed in, we want what's in their heads. But there's a lot of, especially as we're trying to get more adoption, the more, maybe the less committed users to bike and pedestrian transportation, this kind of a tool, they can just, whenever they get home from a ride, they jump on. I would love to see this somehow, it's hard, lifted up a little more. Oh, there it is. So, so this is kind of wonderful, because the green ones are where we think infrastructure is needed, or where people do the little exclamation marks or the safety concerns. It's very interesting, and it's hard to see, but there's like a little gray comment bubble where people also write stuff. And it's pretty wonderful. I do want to note that despite the last conversation, I've been going up and down Alma between Meadow and Oregon, and there's nothing that says we want a crossing there. There's nothing that says there's a problem there. So it's kind of weird. So that tells me that I don't know who's using this so far. Okay, what, you have a reason that isn't there?
Yes.
Okay.
I do have a reason.
Please share.
Actually, you look at this and you might think, oh, there's a lot of comments already on there. But we actually had to clear it off because it was so filled with comments, and then you wouldn't be able to see where to put the comments. So we have received so many comments that this is the second version of the map. So we've repopulated it so that people could actually not just see a wall of comments.
Good to know. Okay, that makes more sense because I was a little concerned because I literally, after this big discussion we just had, there's not much there right now, but you cleared it. Okay, that's great. Well, that's what I wanted to lift up in terms of where we're going. Love your map. Glad we're getting use on it, and hopefully we can get some more.
And I'm sorry, just really quick, I want to note that there's a hard cap or hard stop tonight at 5 p.m. I was notified by the clerk.
Yeah. Okay. So the tentative plan is to discontinue this as the first year. Is it? Why not continue it?
Well, at some point, we want to conclude this phase as a community engagement plan to summarize the results.
That I think part of the point that Vicky was making is that people are just starting to get more engaged, and we're liable to have a whole nother layer of input once people really start picking up on this. Like I hadn't even appreciated it was there. I don't, certain parts of the bike community or whatever heard about it, but I think we're going to get a whole nother layer of participation as we.
Can I just add a comment to that? Every spring, we get at the high schools, we get.
Why don't you come up here, Ben?
Oh. I'll be really quick. In the spring, we do big bicycle promotions at the schools. And so that gets more kids on bikes. Kids who might have been, driving because maybe they're new to gun or Pally or whatever. But anyway, we do a hard hit in the spring to get more kids back on bikes, the kids who were bicycling, but also to get some new kids on bikes. And what happens is they start seeing their friends on bikes, and all of a sudden your numbers go from what they were in the early part of the year to something much nicer than that.
And just so you know, Penny led our Safe Routes to School program for 20 years. Thought she had extracted herself and had a successor, and it hasn't totally done so. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, if I can say, so actually the survey was supposed to end on November 30th. It was supposed to conclude at the end of last month, and we decided to extend it through December. So I want to say it started in the beginning of October. So it's gone October, November, December. It's a really long time for us to keep the survey open. The difficulty with keeping it open longer is then it takes us longer to get to the analysis. So this is all part of the analysis, and then wrapping it up, having a hard deadline allows us to move on with the project.
Yeah, I get that advantage, but if it's at the expense of a whole bunch of valued input, we don't want to do that. So I don't know whether there's a way that you capture what we've got and then reopen it once we hit these next phases of community engagement. But I think there will be value to having it back open after this.
Yeah, and just to add, there will be other forms of engagement as we proceed and move along in this effort. So the interactive map is a form of that type of engagement now. And
it looks good. I wasn't aware of it. I've been collecting things for years. Observations, photos, all those things. And I know a lot of other people who bike regularly just see all these different things. I didn't know it was there. I think we'll get a lot more valuable input as we start having that next phase of engagement, because this is kind of preceding most of the engagement, and really you're going to get people ramped up on the whole concept as we go forward with the next steps of engagement. So I think we want to figure out a way to capture that, and I haven't seen anything as good of a tool as this in the past.
And I do want to say that as part of the Safe Streets for All action plan, which also is using the same type of data, we're going to have ongoing opportunities, and we're considering options for interactive maps and physical maps too as we go out. So we are going to be collecting, continuing to collect this type of data.
Philip, how many, not just how many comments, can you tell how many people have put on there? You only know like how many comments? I'm just curious.
I actually don't know, but I do want to say that I checked sometime earlier in November, and on the surveys, we had like 600, and now we're at like 800 surveys. That's for the survey, not for the points on the map. So I do want to say that it seems like it's tapering off a bit since we received like 600 in the first month, and then we've received like 200 something since then. I don't know, as far as the map clearing off, I think that we had, just anecdotally from looking at it, it looked like a lot of comments as we ramped up. We had the blog, we had the social media, all the blasts, we got a lot, and the map filled up really quickly. And it seems like this map is filling up a little bit more slowly now.
Do you think, so is your thought that if you took the data, if you were to keep the close on December 31, you would take this data off of here, do whatever you do, but the thought is you might bring back an interactive map perhaps in a couple of months, or in association maybe the April thing or the phase 2 thing. What I'm wondering is there a possibility that you could learn from the nature of the comments so far how to tweak the map, or is this kind of a standard map? Are there ways we could optimize it? I guess
hypothetically speaking, yes, we can customize it to have different icons that speak to different things or focus on different areas of the map. There is a lot we could do as an input gathering tool. I think a potential second survey that Philip was mentioning would come out through the Safe Streets for All plan. I love that you all love the map. I do too. And I think people want to be heard, and this is a nice forum for it. I think the main concern with keeping it open too long is when people put comments down, they expect a response. And for us to close the map, we can say what we heard and how we responded. If there isn't that same expectation, this map could live on in perpetuity. It doesn't cost us anything to keep it up. It just costs us something to read through the comments.
Maybe we have one closed phase and collect those, and then there'd be a certain point in time where we reopen as people become increasingly engaged.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to suggest is to get to is that we have almost a month left before we close it. And then we can do whatever we do with that. We could even say on the site, next opportunity coming March 1 or whatever it is.
Well, and has this been featured on our homepage? I haven't run into it.
I don't believe it's been on the homepage, but it is on the project website, both for BPTP and Safe.
Okay, so then in this short period of time we have remaining before we would close it, maybe we can get it featured on the homepage, and that would reach a whole bunch of people who aren't going to the project website. They're just regular citizens who only go to the homepage unless they're going for something else.
Yeah, it has been just
yes, it has been featured on our homepage, among our news. I've been mentioning it during my manager's comments. So we've exerted that angle to it. I did, since I've got the floor, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that I love the conversation, and would have to point out that what we're talking about, extending this input period, would conflict with my ability to push staff to compress the time to get to the product. One suggestion for what we might do on the tail end would be, it might be an interesting way to validate the conclusions and perhaps the draft plan that comes as a result, and use that as a way to get additional engagement and feedback at that subsequent phase of this project.
Great. And one other thing I just want to get out on the table, because we only have a couple minutes remaining, that we didn't discuss, is that we're looking at our network plan, and one thing that, to my knowledge, hasn't been a priority in our network plan, but we're potentially going to have imposed on us, is the separated bike lanes on El Camino that Caltrans is pursuing. And whereas in Palo Alto, we've spent decades establishing these parallel routes to El Camino. We haven't had an opportunity as a city to look at the pros and cons of that, whether that should be in addition to what we're doing to try and improve Park, and even on South Palo Alto on Alma into Central Expressway. I've recently been told that actually County Roads has a plan to make a more explicit bike lane on Central. And then we, for a long while in I think our prior plan had the prospect of an off-road path in the very wide parking strip from East Meadow down to San Antonio. And needing to look at the pros and cons of the removing the parking on El Camino to establish a bike lane, and the pros and cons of safety of a separated lane from cars running parallel versus cars every 100 yards being able to cross against a bike lane. And I don't know the answer to those things. It's a big issue, and so I just wanted to get that out there that that here is being imposed on us, that it's not been part of our network study, and we're going to have to see what we do on that in short order. And Philip, to our knowledge, have we seen the actual drawings of what Caltrans is proposing?
No, well, so yeah, we saw an early version quite a while ago, but yeah, it was early concepts, but actually Caltrans has said that they had redone those, and we have not seen those yet. That was in our letter. We requested that by 12/15. We requested that they reply with that information by December 15th.
And they want us to rapidly endorse this process without us even having seen their proposed design.
Among several other questions that we've asked.
Yeah, okay. Just wanted to get that out on the table. All right, so our next meeting is intended to be focused on the Caltrain technical standard feedback, and you've already had an initial meeting with Caltrain on that, and kind of working through getting some clarifications.
Yeah, that's correct. And also trying to confirm that Caltrain can come to our January meeting, as we think there will be questions for Caltrain staff.
Yeah, and they haven't been able to confirm that?
I think we asked them, requested this yesterday in our meeting with them on this. So I think they're reviewing to see if they can.
Well,
they had actually asked for longer and time in order to come, but we requested January.
Okay, well, I've already had a similar discussion with the Caltrain CEO, and I think we'll get them here in January. All right. Unless there's anything else, that concludes the meeting. Thank you.